Live from Washington, D.C., this is Balance of Power with Joe Mathieu.
It's back to the Oval for President Zelensky. Welcome to the Friday edition as Zelensky makes his fourth visit now to President Trump at the White House just a day after Trump made a phone call to Vladimir Putin, suggesting another meeting. We have a lot of questions, and we'll get the latest straight ahead from Bloomberg's Mike Shepard here in Washington. And as Zelensky makes the case for Tomahawk missiles, we hear from an expert, Ben Jensen, from the Futures Lab, senior fellow for the Defense and Security Department at CSIS, will be with us to talk about what a game changer that may or may not be for the war. And we'll bring you to the IMF for a special conversation with Rachel Reeves coming straight up this hour. It's all after a look at Wall Street. Let's do it ahead with Alexis Christoforous, who's in for Charlie Pellet today. Alexis.
All right, thanks, Joe. Stocks are shaking off worries about those bad loans at a couple of regional banks. That's what sent stocks lower yesterday. Today, stocks steadying after President Trump told Fox News that very high tariffs on China are, quote, not sustainable. So right now, the Dow off its best level of the day, but still up 118 points. The S&P 500 up about 12. We've got the NASDAQ on the plus side by 23. Yields are also slightly higher, and precious metals pulling back from their record highs. Gold now down 2.5%. We've got shares of Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk coming under pressure after President Trump said the price of the blockbuster diabetes drug Ozempic could come down to just $150 a month. We know it currently costs about $1,000 for a month's supply. We've got shares of Novo, which makes Ozempic, down about 4%. Shares of Eli Lilly, which has a similar drug, down more than 3%. On the flip side, shares of American Express rallying today, up better than 6% after earnings topped estimates as demand for its revamped Platinum card surged. Also keeping an eye on Apple because it has inked a deal with Formula One, announcing a 5-year media rights deal that will bring all races to the Apple TV platform beginning next season. Apple's going to pay about $140 million a year for those F1 rights. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Alexis Christoforous. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's send it back to Balance of Power now and Joe Mathieu.
All right, Alexis, thanks so much. We'll have more on the markets with Alexis, presuming things don't get rolling on time at the White House, just about 20 minutes away as we keep track of the Friday trade here. Thanks for joining us on the Friday edition of Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. President Zelensky about to make his fourth appearance at the White House, and we've got our eyes trained on the West Wing, where media have gathered in the driveway waiting for his arrival. Zelensky just across the street at Blair House, enjoying the full services of the White House complex. So he's not far away. They're going to sit down for a conversation that we're going to bring you in the room for, remembering that we have had a few different versions of this, including Zelensky's first visit to President Trump in this term that devolved into a shouting match. He has since had better conversations, but new questions following President Trump's conversation with Vladimir Putin yesterday, in which he did not suggest that Tomahawk missiles were on the way to Kyiv. With me now in our Washington bureau is Bloomberg's Mike Shepard, who's also keeping his eyes on the White House today. Mike, what should be our expectations after this talk with Putin?
Well, that really is the big question, and it's more a mystery about how Trump will present himself and the U.S., the Volodymyr Zelenskiy, this time around. Will the call with Vladimir Putin from yesterday influence to a great extent the call or the conversation we're about to see take place? Remember that Zelensky is coming to the White House with a series of requests. One of those, of course, is for some longer range weaponry to be able to strike deeper within Russia at those air bases where they've been launching those drone attacks, and also at some of the industrial production for the defense base of Russia. And yet the coolness that Trump signaled to sending Tomahawk missiles was a bit of a reversal from what he had said several days beforehand, where he had floated the idea of sending Tomahawks to bolster Ukraine, but also send a signal to Putin that it's time to come to the bargaining table.
Yeah, you wonder what Putin said to him yesterday, particularly to get President Trump to the point of floating another meeting. It was suggested later that that may happen. We don't know if there's in fact going to be a gathering in Hungary, but if that does happen, has Vladimir Putin done anything to deserve it?
Well, so far, from the view of many foreign policy observers here in Washington, the answer is a clear no. And even in President Donald Trump's eyes, since the Alaska summit back in August, Vladimir Putin has not taken any really concrete steps, Joe, toward moving to the bargaining table to trying to end the war that he started with the invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. And then prior to that, with the annexation in violation of international law of Crimea. So the Russian government's moves toward trying to reach this peace deal that President Donald Trump promised on the campaign trail, said could be done in a day, really has not been enough to satisfy Trump, who's been increasingly frustrated by this.
But you wonder how the last 3 meetings will inform President Zelenskyy's posture and maybe check his frustration at a moment like this.
Well, he has learned how to read Trump a little bit better. And the more that he spends time with President Donald Trump, the better he understands how to react and, engage in some of the flattery that we have seen other foreign leaders exercise and show to the U.S. leader to try to win favor, to try to win approval and win over his view to join theirs in whatever it may be. And in this case, we will have to see if that will go as far as making that offer on weaponry. Now, Volodymyr Zelensky doesn't go into this completely empty-handed. One thing he is floating is this idea of collaborating with the U.S. on drone production. And that is something where a lot of innovation has occurred in Ukraine. Necessity is the mother of invention, and they've really been able to advance their industry and to a large extent, Joe, on the cheap. And it's the kind of thing that could be replicated here. And there is an interest in the defense base and in the current administration in trying to adopt some of that innovation and sophistication. So we'll see if the U.S. president accepts some of that and perhaps offers something else in exchange.
Maybe that could be some common ground that would result in an announcement.
Certainly.
Mike, thank you so much for helping us get ready for this. Shep with us live in Washington as we wait to hear from both presidents at the White House. And we are spinning a couple of plates today, as always. It's day 17 of the government shutdown. Lawmakers are not in town. But Washington is actually quite busy this week with the IMF meetings underway. And as we wait to hear from President Trump and President Zelensky, it's a great opportunity to bring you an important conversation with the IMF meetings underway now with the UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, who sits down now with my colleague, who you know from Bloomberg Surveillance here on Bloomberg TV, Lisa Abramowicz at the IMF. Lisa, take it away.
Thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate it. I am here with the Chancellor of the Exchequer of the United Kingdom, Rachel Reeves. Chancellor Reeves, thank you so much for being with us. You're heading into a pretty tough budget season. There is the expectation that taxes are going to have to go up and that spending is going to have to cut. How much headroom are you looking to build for yourself so you don't have to do this again in terms of raising taxes again and going through another round of cuts?
I think the British people recognise that the last year has been a challenging one, whether it is conflict in the Middle East, Russia's continued aggression in Ukraine, the need for higher defence spending, and also increasing trade barriers around the world have put countries under a lot of pressure, and no country, including the UK, is immune from that. But I've also been really clear that we will continue to meet the fiscal rules that I set out in my budget last year, and we will get debt down as a share of our economy, we will bring down the deficit, and we will balance day-to-day spending with tax receipts. And when we get the full forecasts from the Independent Office for Budget Responsibility, we will make sure that we are continuing to achieve those things. In terms specifically of the headroom, the headroom has been lower in the past. It was as low as £6.5 billion in the last parliamentary session. Obviously, more headroom would be good, but there's always trade-offs because, of course, to build more headroom, you would have to increase taxes further or cut spending further. But we'll continue to manage that balancing act. But I recognise that in a world as volatile as it is today, having a bit more of a buffer can help absorb shocks.
You've talked about raising the taxes, and in a previous interview you were talking about particularly targeting wealthy residents of the United Kingdom. Is that really the focus right now? Is it broader based in terms of the tax raise you have in mind?
In the budget last year, I did increase taxes on some of the wealthiest, and we also increased taxes on business. I'm very mindful, again, to get the balance right. We want to attract talent to the UK and keep talent in the UK. I also want to make it easier for businesses to grow and stay in Britain. So I'll set out the individual taxes on November the 26th, but I want this to be a pro-growth budget that maintains Britain as a great place to start and grow a business and to bring in investment. And obviously over the last few months we've secured huge amounts of foreign direct investment, including from the United States, with those big technology companies investing in Britain.
There's been a concern that if taxes go up too much on businesses, people will start to leave and individuals will leave, and that there's been some anecdotal evidence of that just personally when I meet people from London and New York. I'm just wondering, have you kind of grown aware of that and tried to reduce how much you lean on that lever?
Well, we made some further changes to the tax arrangements for non-domiciled people earlier this year, which I think have been welcomed. We'll continue to monitor the response to any tax, but I would also say there are many people choosing to make Britain their home. We've just doubled the number of visas available for high net worth individuals, for entrepreneurs, and for academics in some of the growth sectors to build teams in the UK. And we've no doubt that people will apply for those visas and we will fill those places. So the UK remains an attractive place, in part because we are securing investment from the world. We're reforming our capital markets to make it easier for businesses to raise finance in London, and we're reforming our regulatory and planning systems to make it easier to get things done in the UK.
How much are you planning to cut some of the welfare spending in particular, not just sort of day-to-day spending of the government?
Well, it is important to make sure that all budgets, including the welfare budget, are well managed, and we do need to see reform of our welfare system. And we'll continue to make the case with that reform. We've already brought in some changes to something called the universal credit system to reduce the incentives to get the health-related element of that. And just a couple of weeks ago, I announced a youth guarantee to help young people not in education, employment and training get back into work. Like many countries around the world, particularly since the pandemic, we have experienced challenges in terms of youth unemployment and youth inactivity, and we're determined to turn that around with particular programmes targeted at those young people. One
big question for a lot of people is the Office for Budget Responsibility and what they'll come out with in terms of downgrading the growth forecast for the United Kingdom. Do you have any expectation or understanding of what that growth downgrade looks like? Well, the Office of Budget Responsibility, like other forecasters, use the past productivity performance to forecast the future. And it is true that under the previous government, over the last 14 years, both growth and productivity were underwhelming. And the Office of Budget Responsibility will update their predictions for the future based on the past. And it's my job as Chancellor to try and beat those expectations. And that's why we're pursuing policies on trade, investment, on planning, on permitting, on regulation and capital market reform, as well as through the trade deals that we're securing to make sure that our economy is well suited to benefit from global investment, from business and wealth creation, and that's what we'll continue to do. Chancellor Reeves, thank you so much for taking the time. Thank you. That was Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the United Kingdom. Joe, I'll send it back to you.
Great. Lisa, thank you so much. What a treat to have Lisa Abramowicz in Washington bringing us that great conversation with the Chancellor. We thank you. It's live on Bloomberg as we keep our eyes on a couple of moving parts here, including an imminent meeting between President Trump and President Zelenskyy. They're preparing in the West Wing for his arrival right now. He was supposed to be there about 13 minutes ago at the top of the hour. These things tend to go late. When these two gentlemen do sit down, we're going to bring you in the room so you can hear everything that the reporters hear live and unfiltered, knowing that these have taken on a couple of different shapes in what is now the fourth visit by Zelenskyy to the White House. He spent the evening at Blair House across the street, and he is, by the way, expected to hold his own press conference with reporters afterward. Now, we did hear from President Trump about this meeting yesterday because he spoke on the phone for some time. It was a 2-hour call, we understand, with Vladimir Putin, remembering that Zelenskyy wanted Tomahawk missiles, cruise missiles that could reach Moscow to help turn the tide in this war. President Trump suggested that he was considering that request. But then we heard from him yesterday following his call from Putin, and it's unclear where we stand. Here's the president.
We talked about it a little bit, didn't say much, but I do say to you, we need Tomahawks for the United States of America, too. We have a lot of them, but we need them. I mean, we can't deplete for our country. So, they're very vital. They're very powerful. They're very accurate. They're very good, but we need them, too. So I don't know what we can do about that.
Okay. So how many do we have? How many could we afford to give? And what difference would it actually make in the war? We thought we would talk to an expert, a voice you've heard before on this program and seen before on Balance of Power. Ben Jensen is back with us. He's director of the Futures Lab and senior fellow for the Defense and Security Department at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS. Ben, welcome back. It's great to have you on Bloomberg. Some basic questions to start with here. In terms of the efficacy of a Tomahawk missile, if you put this in the hands of the Ukrainians, could it in fact reach Moscow? What type of damage would it do, and what would be the impact on the war?
Sure, yeah. Great to be back again, and because you have empirical viewers, let's start with just the facts.
Super.
The Tomahawk, the way it works is it does have the range characteristics where fired from either in the air, can go further, or from the ground, not as far, but either firing trajectory would mean that it could reach strategically important targets in and around Moscow and other centers. This is why Putin really needs to try to declare a new red line. What is we up to, like his 20th red line?
Maybe,
who knows? Yeah. But that's the real efficacy of it, its range.
Yep.
The other key factor isn't just that it can go far with a big boom, it's how it actually flies. So the Tomahawk is amazing because this is actually old 80s technology.
Yeah, right.
It actually flies based upon digital maps it creates the terrain beneath it. So this means it actually is less susceptible to GPS jamming because it's following its own almost version of terrain recognition. That also means it can fly lower than some radars can pick it up.
Okay.
So a Tomahawk is designed to fly long distances, to stay low to the ground, and then to pop up and hit the target so the defender has less time to react. That's why it's such a disturbing weapon for the Russians and so effective for the Ukrainians.
Would we have to also provide a delivery system, or could this be delivered by boat, by ground, by aircraft that Ukraine already has?
Ukraine is second only to MacGyver in its ability to make battlefield improvisation. So I have no doubt the Ukrainians would find a way to fire it, even if we somehow forgot to deliver it, which our military is good, we wouldn't. The bigger question is how much intelligence would you pass with it? Are you helping train the flight profiles and routes? This has been an issue with Scout missiles in the past. So Tomahawk is a cruise missile. European countries have given other cruise missiles to the Ukrainians in the past. So you're right, it does come with a support package. It's not just you buy it off the shelf, you take it home and use it. You have to think about that intelligence package, and then also how are you firing it.
Okay, let's talk inventories. President Trump, who was open to this idea a couple of days ago, says, hey, we need them too, and we cannot deplete. Do we have a sense of how many we have?
So not as readily as you think. Usually, defense wonks like myself spend time looking at congressional budgets to see how many were ordered and how many were bought. And then sometimes we don't get accurate numbers and the number shot in terms of actual strikes on an enemy, or much less in training. So what we do know is this is a high demand asset, right? You always hear that term. It's why it's ubiquitous now to say Tomahawk, which means there's never enough. And the bigger issue we have is that we just can't produce many of these missiles at the large enough quantities and in a timely manner, especially when we're confronted with the world where one day we might fire a Tomahawk from a destroyer to hit a Houthi. The next day we might give it to Ukrainian to shoot something in Russia. But then the following day, we all of a sudden need to fire 1,000 of them in the defense of a treaty ally like the Philippines or Japan because of the Taiwan scenario.
Okay, so you mentioned Yemen, by the way. We've popped off a lot of these at Yemen, and they come at what, $1 million a pop?
Yeah, prices vary. And remember, the way the defense contracts work, it isn't just as simple. You have to go for an average, $1 million a pop on average, but it depends on the block. And so my guess is we're probably going to give older inventory, lower block item Tomahawks to the Ukrainians to fire. Ones that we would be kind of like we did with some of the ATACMs that were nearing the end of their service life. So it's still an amazing missile. That's not to discount its power. But we're not going to be giving them the latest block that is more advanced and has maybe even some other features that would be of interest.
Could it change the strategy for Ukraine? Could it break this war of attrition, or would this just be an opportunity to provide a deterrent for Vladimir Putin? How would it be employed?
I tend to look at this, and this is where I think something is happening that's more interesting than gets credit in the Trump administration. I think that they're actually having what I would call a compounding coercive campaign right now. So the Tomahawks are actually a powerful deterrent and a powerful negotiating mechanism, even if not a single one enters Ukraine. Now Vladimir Putin has to reckon with the Americans can give the Ukrainians something that can hit targets with a bigger boom than the long-range drones attacks that are hitting Russian oil refineries. That is taken as compounding, because now think of the economic side. We've got the Indian oil dynamics going on. We've got this new call for a victory tariff to further hit Chinese support to Russia. We've got existing sanctions. We've got EU calls to create really interesting, like structured financial products, like essentially loans off Russian frozen assets. And we even have a bill in the U.S. Where we would essentially take, I think it's about $6 billion, it's a few $1 billion of Russian frozen assets and give it to the Ukrainians. So I actually see the economic dimensions of that coercive campaign as more deterrent than the individual Tomahawk delivery, but you can't separate them. I think the Trump team has developed a pretty sophisticated notion of this compounding coercive signal to try to really put the hard press on Putin in the wake of Gaza to then kind of put at least freeze the conflict, if not outright end it.
Fascinating. It's a great theory, and it makes a lot of sense. And I wonder, when you consider the hotspots around the world, the amount of munitions that we're providing and using, there was fascinating analysis from Colonel Sanders at Bloomberg Intelligence, who sits right in the newsroom with us and was out with a client note talking about a potential re-rating of the major defense contractors based on the massive orders for missiles specifically that are going to be coming. Tomahawk is a Lockheed product. Who makes it?
Well, remember, the weirdest part about most of these is because after that famous thing you call the Last Supper in defense, where you went from a lot of firms to a few firms, it's never as simple as
everyone makes everything here. Like it takes every company to make something, right?
And never think about a missile as just a missile. A missile is a series of component parts, from a rocket engine to a guidance system to a warhead to avionics to a command and control suite. So usually the really interesting way to look at these weapon systems, and especially for Bloomberg watchers, as you're thinking about this, from how do you make bets upon the possibility of protracted conflict or the recapitalization of the American industrial base, you really have to look at it at that angle.
Fascinating.
Then you start making very different bets, because it turns out probably in a couple years we're probably going to have more rocket motors than we need, but we might not have as many drones as we need. And so you have to start to look carefully at what companies, who are their contracts, who are their suppliers. You then got to throw in weird curveballs like this whole critical mineral thing and the magnets. So it's never just as simple as Boeing or a Lockheed or a Northrop, all of whom make phenomenal weapons. It's what part of the end item do they make, and then where do we understand those supply chains? And because of that complexity, that's why it's so hard to recapitalize the defense industrial base.
What a great answer. So it sounds like for the investor, you might be looking at a basket. You're buying the industry, maybe more than individual names. But where do the Andurils come into play here, and some of the other smaller, more nimble, more innovative defense contractors that they're being profiled on 60 Minutes as the next big thing? Will that, in fact, change procurement at the Pentagon? Unmanned drone, whether it's air or water?
Who knows? I mean, in some sense...
You don't seem impressed at all.
So I'm impressed with some of their stuff, but I'll be more impressed when they have multiple factories that are mass producing.
Understood. It's about scale for you.
Yeah, it's about scale. And I also think a lot of the defense primes, despite the inefficiencies of federal procurement processes, a lot of our actually large primes are actually some of the most innovative companies you can find. It's American firms with DARPA that invent this thing called stealth. It's American firms actually working with DARPA researchers that invent the internet. So I have yet to see any small, amazing, disruptive company that has something as disruptive as stealth aircraft or the internet.
Really interesting.
What I do see, though, is that their willingness to create a more competitive, kind of Schumpeterian creative destruction landscape. So if nothing else, even if a lot of these new defense companies end up failing and failing tragically, they've at least forced interesting debates and energy, which is exactly what we want in capitalism. So I think they're serving a really important function. I think some of them will do amazing work, but don't discount some of the amazing stuff that these larger defense firms make.
Oh, how much did we just learn in the last 10 minutes from Ben Jensen? Come on every day. That was truly helpful, and I think we got a lot out of it, Ben. Thank you so much.
Always love coming to see you.
CSIS, which is just an incredible stable of talent and insight here on the program. Ben, thank you so much for being with us here. Keep this in mind when you hear President Trump and President Zelensky talking about tomahawks, and when reporters ask about that, that could kick off at any moment. We're going to bring it to the White House when President Zelensky arrives. And of course, we're always keeping tabs on Wall Street. We've been talking stocks a little bit here with regard to defense, but let's get the big picture right now. Alexis Christoforous has Wall Street for us covered at World Headquarters in New York. Alexis?
Another roller coaster ride on Wall Street today, Joe. An earlier rally starting to lose a little steam here. Investors still trying to shake off those bank credit concerns at a couple of regional banks, which we know sparked yesterday's big sell-off. So right now, the Dow off its best levels, but up 117. The S&P 500 now in the green by about 8. The NASDAQ composite adding about 12 points, we'll call it. And precious metals pulling back from their record run. We've got gold down nearly 3% and spot silver off nearly 6%. Biggest drop there in 6 months. Now, stocks that led yesterday's sell-off are rallying back today. We've got Zions Bancorp up about 4%. Also, Western Alliance up now 2%, as a lot of investors believe problems at those banks are specific to those banks and don't represent a wider issue in the banking industry. Also, investment bank Jefferies up by more than 4%. It was caught in the storm for its exposure to bankrupt auto parts retailer First Brands. Well, Jefferies was upgraded today at Oppenheimer. And shares of American Express up 6.5%. Earnings there topping estimates as demand for its revamped Platinum card surged last quarter. For on-demand news 24 hours a day, subscribe to Bloomberg News Now wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Alexis Christoforous. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Back over to Joe Mathieu in Balance of Power.
Do appreciate it, Alexis. Thanks. We'll have more on the markets with Alexis Christoforous in about 20 minutes' time. Thank you for spending part of your Friday with us on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Indeed, I'm Joe Mathieu in Washington, and we're waiting to see something start here at the White House when President Zelensky arrives at the West Wing. Things will start to move pretty quickly. We've been through this 3 times already. Of course, this is his 4th visit with the call for Tomahawk missiles, that not just Tomahawks as well, and also defensive weaponry to close the skies, as Zelensky likes to say. There's a live view if you're with us on Bloomberg TV or on YouTube of the West Wing entrance. When Zelensky arrives, President Trump will step out and welcome him inside, and then we'll be off and running with a bilateral meeting that will involve reporters, and we'll hear that and see it live and unfiltered here on Bloomberg. As we assemble our political panel with their take, and to the big questions, which Trump do we get, which Zelensky do we get today? We've seen 4 different versions of this, or we will have by the end of the day. The first 3 were different in very significant ways, and we're joined now by Bloomberg Politics contributor, Democratic analyst Jeanne Zaino, democracy visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center, alongside Republican strategist Lisa Camooso Miller, the former RNC communications director and host of the great Friday Reporter podcast. Lisa, which Zelensky shows up today and which Trump will greet him?
Oh, boy. I mean, Joe, it's hard to tell. I think that both sides probably are feeling very optimistic. There's been a lot of good news as it relates to what's happening overseas in terms of negotiation conversations, open conversations. I think a lot of it will be tempered by how the call went yesterday with Putin. And that's, to me, also, there's so many variables that could take place here. I'm optimistic. I'm hopeful that it's a productive conversation because it's one that needs to be had. And it's one that needs to keep the momentum going.
I have to admit, I'd be on time for this, Jeanne, if it were me. He's a half an hour late, and maybe that was in coordination with the White House. That we don't know. He's staying literally across the street at Blair House. Be curious to see if he walks or drives over. We can tell you, according to the press pool, by the way, that a military honor guard is waiting on the lawn, lined up along the driveway there to greet him. So he is not getting the red carpet, so to speak, but the same treatment as another world leader, Jeanne, which is a lot different than the feeling, at least, that we had on his first visit. Is this going to be contentious, collaborative? What's the vibe today?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned the Blair House, because my understanding is this is the first time in one of these visits he has been able to stay at the Blair House, which several people are suggesting is a sign of respect. In the past, I think he's had to get one of those hotels in D.C. that we've all stayed at. So it's
a great point that you make, Jeanne. He was staying at the Four Seasons the night that the meeting went south. And forgive me for interrupting, but he has just arrived. There you see the two standing side by side at the West Wing portico. The president He's got his arm around him, pat on the back. It looks, based on my view here, it's a little bit difficult to tell in the shadows that he's wearing the same black suit that he had on last evening, and they've just resolved inside the West Wing. So we'll be hearing from them a bit from now as the photographers follow them inside. Jeanne, it's an upgrade to get Blair House when you're used to staying in a hotel, even if it is the Four Seasons.
That's right. And listen, I love myself some Four Seasons, Joe, so I would stay there in a heartbeat. But the Blair House is an upgrade. So that people are saying is one sign that he may be looking forward to a meeting with more respect. But we never know. I mean, you and I were sitting here the first meeting and, you know, we probably thought it was going to be a regular meeting, and it turned into something other than any of us had ever seen. And of course, a big question is J.D. Vance, is the vice president there? It's hard to know. But, you know, I do think on this Tomahawk issue, one thing, and I thought Ben's point was so well taken, the politics of this, I think, are even more critical than the strategy from a military perspective, because, of course, they already have the flamingos. They already have the ability to go into Russia and with a precision missile. And that hasn't changed the trajectory of the war. And most experts say that even if they got a limited number of Tomahawks, it wouldn't change the trajectory of the war. But it was enough to get Vladimir Putin on that phone call yesterday, which, to Lisa's point, is really critical here. And Donald Trump seems to have altered his thinking, maybe, in terms of both the Tomahawks and sanctions, with that bipartisan bill still hovering over. So Vladimir Putin, and congratulating Donald Trump, they all know how to play him now. Zelensky in his suit today seems to have been able to speak his language on the sanctions and the Tomahawks to a certain extent so far.
Press pool is gathering right now, so we could be hearing and seeing them shortly with more color from the pool. If you put yourself out there on the driveway, having just seen these two at the door together, the faint sound of music is emanating from the Rose Garden, what the president calls the Rose Garden Club. The soundtrack for this arrival, Chiquita by ABBA and Maria from West Side Story. Lisa, what will be the mood music for the meeting?
I don't know, Joe. Did you just hand me the auxiliary connection? I don't know, Joe. I mean, you know, the whole thing to me is just bananas. This whole, don't even get me started on the Rose Garden conversation. I think more than anything, though, it's a great sign. Jeanne makes an awesome point about the fact that he's at Blair House. Great conversation, great starting point that the two of them meet one another. They meet at the same point of view. They're dressed similarly. I mean, all of these sort of small moments that we're looking for some indication about how the conversation goes to show that there has been a tremendous evolution in this relationship. And that, to me, I think is encouraging. I'm encouraged by that alone. And so I'll be curious to see how this conversation goes. But this relationship is one that has been fraught with ups and downs. The other point Jeanne makes is very good. Who knows who's in the room? Is it the vice president? Is it someone else? Is it P. Hegseth, right? So all of these pieces are really set to be played out today. We'll wait and see.
Or maybe Andrea Bocelli, who was in the Oval Office a short time ago, Jeanne. That Oval Office, as the president likes to call it, the greatest show on earth, is quite the staging area. And so this is going to play locally for President Zelensky as well. I mentioned he's going to hold a news conference, maybe an impromptu news conference out there in outside, presumably, the White House gates. He said he would do it in front of Blair House later on today. What's going to happen here following the meeting when both sides try to frame this to their own benefit? And how will it play locally for President Zelensky?
Yeah, and Joe, I'm glad you said they played Maria from West Side Story and not like I Feel Pretty or one of those. So I think Donald Trump
I can't say they didn't, but yeah.
Yeah, let's hope not. And I love West Side Story. But, you know, I'm glad you raised the domestic issue, because that is critical. And it's on both sides, of course, for Zelensky, who is facing his own real challenges at home, and also for Donald Trump. I mean, we had Marjorie Taylor Greene out in the last few hours talking about the fact that Donald Trump has taken his eye off the America First agenda with what she calls a revolving door of foreign policy leaders and less focus on things like you just had Lisa Abramowicz on talking about the economy, affordability, housing. And so these, the domestic issues are critical. And I'm going to be very curious to see if both Zelensky and Donald Trump can do anything to improve their standing domestically. Because, of course, when you see the MAGA folks starting to cry foul when Donald Trump is focusing too much on foreign policy, that is a sign that he needs to get back to the business of the government, which is in its 14th, 15th day of a shutdown. And of course, again, Zelensky has his own challenges at home.
Day 17, Jeanne, and nobody's talking about it. You're the first person I think maybe I said something at this hour. It is interesting how we go from one to the next, but that's what Flooding the Zone is all about. We have less than a minute left, Lisa. What are you going to be watching when the cameras open up and we see these two sitting there? What are you watching for? Is it like Jeanne said, who's on the other couch?
Yeah, I mean, no doubt about it. I'm looking for who's on the other couch, and I'm looking for body language. Look, I'm a communications person by trade, Joe, so I'm always looking for those nonverbal cues. How did it go? How did this early conversation when they walked in the door? What did the president talk about? How did it go? Who greeted him? There's so many. I mean, that's why we're here on the political panel, because we love to evaluate all these little ins and outs. And so for me, I'm really looking for that early body language and who else is in the room.
Yep. Excellent. It's going to be the cabinet room, by the way, and we're going into overtime here because we're just now watching reporters enter the room. We want to make sure they get the microphone straight. Everyone's standing against that wall. This is the long cabinet room table. There you see it on Bloomberg TV. And once the president gets started here, they've got the boom mics out. We will get up and rolling here. Jeanne was asking the question, of course, who is in the room? And we're getting a sense of that now. J.D. Vance is sitting right next to the president at his right, and Marco Rubio at his immediate left, with the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, and the Treasury Secretary the next seat over. These are typically the sort of assigned seats that we see at meetings like these. President Zelensky in the White House. If you're joining us right now on Bloomberg TV, these are live pictures as we wait for this conversation to begin. There's no telling how long it will go or what questions will be asked, but we do have the press pool in the room, and we start now with live coverage here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Here's President Trump.